How's everybody doing this afternoon? We'll continue with a gardening seminar we started about a month ago. Last time we did a lot of spiritual aspects with this, but this time around we'll do a little bit more into some of the things that go into it. But we'll start with Isaiah 61:11. It says, "For as the earth bringeth forth her bud, and as the garden causeth the things that are sown in it to spring forth, so the Lord will cause righteousness to pray and praise to spring forth before all nations." So as you know, part one was about prayer, planning, preparation, and planting. This time around, we will deal with planning, harvesting, storage, and pest and animal control. So in Adventist homes, it says, "God will instruct and teach he who taught Adam and Eve in Eden how to tend the garden would instruct men today. There is wisdom for him who holds the plow and plants and sows the seed." So under planning, we have these things. We have city versus country, because some people will be planting gardens in the city. Some have already got their land in the country, so they'll be doing their garden out in the country. So there is a difference between those two things. Types of garden, location and size, then you know what to plant, what you're going to eat of that nature. Soil preparation, and then there's like garden maintenance with your plants, and also garden maintenance with your raised beds or your land or your containers or whatever you're using. So the first thing is city versus country, and the first thing is wind. So when we first lived out in, first had our raised beds at our house in Grandview, and then we went out to Holden a few years later. So Holden is out in the country, so it's about 21 miles east of Lee Summit. And so when we first started, we got there. Fortunately for us, somebody already had put a little raised bed together, fenced it off and everything. But it was wide open. So we was renting a house that was on 4 acres. So one of the things when we started planning things, and one of the first things I noticed about when you're in the garden is the wind. In the city, when you plant garden in the city, like we are in Belton, you have houses, you have buildings, it blocks the wind. When we got out into the country, ain't no building blocking your garden. So normally we'll have winds coming in when thunderstorms roll through. We'll have winds about 30, 40, 50 miles per hour that will come through your garden. So I think the first year we was out there, we had a real bad thunderstorm come through, and it snapped like 4 of my bell pepper plants in half. So suffice it to say, the next year I staked everything. So you can get stakes. You get I have about 6, 8-foot stakes for my tomato plants, and then I had 4-foot stakes for my bell peppers, eggplants, things of that nature. Your collards and your broccoli are pretty thick at the root, and they usually go in the cold in the spring and the fall, so you usually don't deal with thunderstorms with them. Second thing you're going to have to talk about and worry about is clothing. So out there in the city, you don't have to worry too much about insect bites and stuff like that, but in the country you do. So you definitely want to wear, think about long sleeves, thick long sleeves, not the nylon, because you can still get bitten through those in jeans. So when you look at one of the shows, you just look at Little House on the Prairie, you never understood why they always wore a long sleeve all the time. But when you start gardening, you understand why they wore a long sleeve all the time. So one of the things you want to worry about, and one of the reasons you do is because in the city you have little ticks, but out in the country you have deer ticks. And deer ticks, you can get Lyme disease with that. So it's another reason why you want to make sure that, jeans and stuff in the garden out in the country, and also make sure whatever long sleeve shirt you wear is pretty thick. Not like a sweater thick, but not nylon either type of deal. The other thing is pests and critters. In the city, you have rabbits for the most part, and you have some deer, but mostly rabbits. In the country, you get mosquitoes. You get mosquitoes. Country, you have all that. Plus, you have coyotes, foxes. You have more deer, so you got to make sure your garden is blocked off in the country. You got field mice. They call them voles, but they're really field mice. And there's really no way, only way you can control those, and we'll get into a little section later about how to control those, but mostly it'll be like tomcats. But there's more animals to attack your garden when you're out in the country versus in the city, because again, you got buildings, you got fences, and you got stuff of that nature. So some of the things to think about when you're gardening in the city versus the country. Next thing is water and irrigation. Again, in the city, you can just plant your garden, you let a raised bed you got a water hose in the back, you can just plant and spray and you're good. In the country, you may not be near a water source. So you need to think about how you're going to irrigate your garden, water it. If you buy a creek, ideally if you have a water source on your property, you can use it like a creek or something, you can use that to water your garden. Another thing you can think about is getting rain barrels and have those around your house, and when it rains, you just collect those in the rain barrel, and then you can use, and I think there's like pressurized type rain barrels that you can use then to water your garden. But in the country, it's a little bit different, so you got to think in mind, how can I get to, how can I water my garden in the country, because it's a little bit different. And we was in Holden, I ended up getting it was like a 150-foot hose or something like that to get to my garden and spray it properly and all that stuff. So there's some of the things you need to think about when you're talking about gardening. Sister White says, in country living, if we place ourselves under objectionable influences, can we expect God to work a miracle to undo the results of our wrong course? No, indeed. Get out of the cities as soon as possible and purchase a little piece of land where you can have a garden, where your children can watch the flowers growing and learn from them lessons of simplicity and purity. General Conference, probably the original quote where that was found at. So what type of garden will you have? There are 3 types of gardens you can have. You can have an in-ground garden where you till up the land. You can have a raised bed garden, or you can do a container type of garden. In-ground, more weeding, more exercise, more exertion you have to use to keep that in shape. Raised bed, it will take a lot of work to put it together initially as far as getting the dirt and stuff. But outside of that, it should be minimal as far as taking care of your plants. And then containers, not much work is needed in that. Usually like your herbs can be grown in containers. You can get bigger containers if you want to grow things. So when we think about in-ground, one of the things you need to know about in-ground is you probably will need a lot of equipment to do that. So you will need a tiller. You need stakes, shovels. You probably need a riding lawnmower also, because you need to cut the grass around your garden when you do an in-ground garden, unless you're going to. So normally you don't see in-ground gardens in houses and subdivisions just because you got wires and stuff running underneath the ground. So if you use a tiller, you can, but you can't use a tiller you would use in your house, in your backyard. Is a little small tillers where it doesn't till up that much versus a tiller you have out in the country where it tills up deeper into the ground where you don't hit up the wires and stuff. So in the country, you need a lot more because you need to cut the grass around there, keep the grass low and stuff like that. So when you're talking about in-ground, you want something that tills up the dirt maybe a foot deep, something like that. And then you'll till in your mulch, you'll till in your peat moss, you till in your manure or fertilizer, what you're using for your garden. Space. When you do an in-ground garden, you will need a lot of space. So if you look at the church, maybe this side over here will be like an in-ground garden, because in an in-ground garden, you want space in between the rows of your plants. In a raised bed, you don't need that, but in a garden, in an in-ground garden, you need space to walk in between your rows. So your rows may be spaced out maybe 3 to 5 feet apart when you're doing in-ground gardening. Again, we talked about time, weeding, watering. You would spend a lot more time weeding in an in-ground garden, because what you're doing, especially when you till up the ground for the first time, you till it up, you got all that grass in it, so you're pulling out the grass, and then next year you'll till up again. This grass still there. I think somebody at the community garden said you probably had to till up that area 3 years in a row before grass would stop growing in that area. So initially, that in-ground gardening is going to be a lot of work. So you need to be conscientious to the size of that in-ground garden if that's the route you're going to go. And then obviously with an in-ground garden, do you need more than one person? More than likely, you will need more than one person helping you at least on a part-time basis if you have an in-ground garden. Because there's a lot of things you have to attend to. Like I said, the weed, you got to stay on top of the weeding. If you miss weeding for maybe like 3 days in the in-ground garden, you're just everywhere. And it's harder to get out when you miss it like that. So there's some of the aspects of in-ground gardening that you need to keep in mind. Raised beds. So raised beds is what I do, and I think Sister Danielle does. So one of the things you think about when you're talking about raised beds is wood, nail, cordless drill. You drill because you can't use a hammer if you want to. Weed barrier on the bottom to keep the weeds out, stuff like that. Dirt. You will need topsoil. You'll need peat moss. You'll need manure, vegetable scraps from your kitchen. And make sure the vegetable scraps are more of the raw type nature to put in your garden to help nourish the soil. One thing there's 2 ways you can do about getting your dirt there. You can buy a bunch of bags of topsoil, haul it back to your backyard and do it that way, or you can hire somebody to bring in topsoil with a dump truck or something like that, or a pickup truck, and just dump it, and you can just shovel it in your garden. There's 2 ways you can go about doing that. But initially, you will need a lot of dirt. Well, depends on the size of how many raised beds you're doing. It depends on that. But we will need a lot of dirt to begin with. Make sure your flatbed is on a flat land, level surface. If it's on a kind of an incline, what happens is you'll screw everything together to get all the dirt in there and all that stuff. And what happens is over time that dirt will slide if it's an incline, and then your raised bed will come apart. So make sure that's something I learned in Holden. So make sure it's on a flat surface as much as possible with your raised bed. Obviously with the raised bed, less exertion because you got the weed barrier down, so weeds shouldn't be coming through as much. And then on top of that is just a shorter amount of area to cover. One of the main things about raised bed is your wood. So you can either do a cedar or you can do common board. Either wood, make sure it's untreated. And they will say it when you go to Home Depot or you go to Lowe's. It will say treated wood or it says untreated wood. Treated wood is usually used for decks and stuff like that, so it stands up more to the elements. The best, if you can afford it, the best wood to get is cedar, untreated cedar. It'll last the longest. I'll show you a little later. I bought a little raised bed from Home Depot. It's about $40, but it was cedar, and it lasted me about 6 or 7 years. Common board will wear out about 2 to 3 years just because of the element. Cedar holds up better to element. Cedar is more expensive. So when I did my raised bed last year, a common board, I did 2 by 8 feet. It was about $6 for each board. 2 by 8 feet for cedar, maybe like $16, $17 a board. So you may wait to use cedar when you get out into the country, or if you're blessed, you can go ahead and get cedar now. Home Depot, you can buy the 2 by 8, and they'll cut it in half for free. You just tell them, hey, I need to cut this in half, and then you got your 4 by 4 type of deal, or you can do a 3 by 6, however you want to do it. Sister Danielle want to talk about her raised bed?
Okay, so here's an example. Here you go. I'll give this to you. This is an example of, this is my layout currently at my home. And when we were talking about raised bed and planning, this was planning. What I had did first was, in conjunction with, okay, I decided to do raised beds, I needed to plan on how I was going to protect the foundation, okay? The other thing, too, is I started figuring out, based on what I wanted to plant, what size I wanted each area to be. And then also this year, I also sectioned off one because I was going to do a test of a different soil recipe formula. So I did not want that to be confused with the rest of my garden. So as you can see here, this was actually someone's in-ground garden, but I couldn't tell if there were chemicals that were used in this. I had it tilled 3 times throughout an entire year. The first year that we moved here, I did not do anything. This wasn't even there. But that area, the railroad ties, that was all there. I had someone come out and I tilled it a few times through like every 3 months. And weeds still kept growing. And then as one of the guys that came out to till, he hit something really hard. Remember what Elder Nate was saying? Sometimes you might hit wires. What we didn't realize was, you can't see it in this photo, but to the far right, there is a big, huge tree. Well, there was a tree trunk growing underneath the fence line, growing underneath that bed. So when you've got a situation like that, that tree trunk, if you decide that you're trying to do in-ground, that tree trunk is going to be an enemy, okay? Because it's going to constantly keep growing a branch, which then will sprout leaves, which then looks like to you like it's weeds, and then you're constantly trying to go after it, okay? So once I determined after that first year that I cannot use that bed, then I decided, well, let me put raised beds on top of it. So the black tarp that you see down, that's a weed blocker. And what that does is it keeps grass from growing. If you can block and shield sun from hitting your grass, it can't grow, okay? So what that does is it still allows drainage, because, you know, when you're watering your beds, you need that water to keep going down and out. You don't want that sitting up like a pool. But it keeps grass from growing because the sun can't hit it, okay? And you can get this on all size rolls. It kind of looks like trash bag, kind of like type material, but it's on a big roll. You can get it at any home improvement store. Actually, even too, I noticed like Dollar General and them stores are really promoting gardening and stuff, and they're starting to sell these same types of supplies. So I put that down, and then I put the raised beds up. Now, these raised beds are made out of a recycled composite material, and I actually got these raised beds that you're seeing on the screen. I got those from Sam's. And actually, a few of those, I've had, like the ones that are a little bit more washed out in the back, I've actually had those for about 4 years. And the ones that are darker, I just bought those. So they really hold up. And what's nice about it is if you move, they come apart like puzzle pieces. You just take them apart, pack them up, move on, you know, and then take them back, and then just put them back together, and they just slide in. The most that you might need for a tool for putting something like these together is a rubber hammer. So you can just kind of like, you know, tap them and put them back into place. But that's right now, currently, that's my layout right now of a raised bed.
So this is when we were back when I lived in Grandview. So this was my first attempt at a raised bed. So the wood that I bought there was from Home Depot. I got it on sale for, I think I have like $38, $40, something like that. And this was a 4x4. And like she said, I didn't have to get any tools or screwdrivers or anything like that. I just tap it in and it sat in place. And I got, I don't know, that bed you probably got to see, but that bed over there, you can see where I got the weed barrier down. And this last night, I got this in like 2012, and they just finally wore out maybe in 2016, 2017. So I got my money's worth. Now, like I said, it's $40 for something like that pre-made, or you can just go to Home Depot and spend $12 and just use a little time and energy to put your raised bed together, and you probably save like $30, $20, $25, $30 by doing it that way. So the next thing is container garden. So containers are like pots, and sometimes people do containers in pots and railroad things, and other people do it in Rubbermaid containers. And the reason I put a cost there, because you can go to Home Depot, you can go to Lowe's, they got these nice pretty pots and ceramic and all this other stuff, but if you want to get a nice sized pot that's like a ceramic or clay or something like that, you may be paying $40, $50, versus if you just go get some Rubbermaid containers, pay like $12, and you can save yourself a ton of money. And all you do is then take a drill bit and you just drill holes at the bottom of it, put a weed barrier down, and you can grow inside the Rubbermaid containers. So if you want to spend the money on the nice decorative pots at Home Depot and Lowe's and gardening centers, knock yourself out. Otherwise, you can use a Rubbermaid container and it'll do the same thing. You just put a little bit more effort again, putting holes in the bottom so you can have drainage, and then, you know, just that way. Dirt, Usual soil, peat moss, manure, scraps, same thing. Good thing about containers, they're portable. They're great for herbs, great for apartments or townhomes or private rooftops. So this is something you can do in the city. So if you're in the city right now and you want to do some type of gardening this year, then you can use the containers to put stuff on your decks or put stuff where you got or you have access to a rooftop. You can do it that way. So some of the containers, this is Sister Danielle's, some of her containers. This is lettuce to the right, cilantro to the left right there, and these are little smaller containers. Here you have romaine lettuce. And the thing about lettuce, especially with the romaine, when they're ready, you can pull the whole plant out if you want to, or you can start breaking off leaves at the bottom, and then the plant continues to grow until it goes to seed. So there's two different ways you can do lettuce, especially the romaine type. Even other types of butter crunch lettuce and stuff like that, you can kind of do the same thing. It's a little bit more difficult, but you can do the same thing. This was back when we was in Holden. These are my two basil plants over there, this and this one over there. One of the things I started growing herbs because my wife one time told me to go to the store, give me some crushed basil or whatever, some basil or ground basil. So I went and I got a little container like this for like almost $5. I was like, you know what, I can grow this and save myself a whole bunch of money by doing that. So not only do we do like vegetable stuff, we do a lot of herbs also. Here is my peppermint plant from last year. And as you can see, it got kind of unwieldy. One of the things about container planting that you need to understand is at some point, your plant will outgrow the pot. So the question becomes then is, do you repot it into something bigger, or you do something a little different, or you find a way to kind of control it so it doesn't outgrow that pot? So for me, I started to realize with my plant last year was it started to get brittle, and it wouldn't grow as much. When I water it, then it'll turn back to being soft and whatever, and it'll grow even more. But I found myself having to water it every 2 days because it just completely outgrew the pot. So we brought it inside. So it's inside right now. It's dormant because it's not growing anything right now. But every so often we get like a few days of sunlight, it'll shoot up a green shoot. So I'm gonna see what happens because I think something my wife wanted to do was to keep all the plants inside this year and see if we can bring them back next year and see if they'll restart and start regrowing again. So if this starts to grow again, I'm gonna have to replant it, repot it into something a lot bigger. Yes.
Also cut it in 4 and take 1 and put it in, then you have 4 different plants.
Okay. So a comment from the audience was that I can cut this plant into 4 equal parts and then plant it again in separate pots and it'll grow again. So that's another idea to keep in mind. So next is location. And we're talking about the placement of your garden. And we went over this already in the last slide, but especially in the northern hemisphere, a vegetable garden should face southward. So you want on the south side of your building or house or whatever you may be at. A south-facing garden receives the largest amount of sunlight as the sun passes overhead throughout the day. It's possible to plant your garden on the south side of your property. If that's not possible, the second best option is to situate your garden on the east or west side of your property, as these directions also receive a large amount of sunlight. So definitely you want especially when you're living in the city, as much as possible, you want your garden on the south side of your property. And ideally, you also want this away from trees and stuff like that so that your plants have plenty of sunlight to grow. Most plants, minimum needs about 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. Typically, that's usually with your fall and spring plants, but your summer plants will probably need about 10 to 13 hours of sunlight. So for instance, with onions, when you plant onions, they'll grow a long green stalk. They'll do that until they get about 13 hours of sunlight a day, and once it gets past 13 hours of sunlight, then they'll start to bulb out. So it's very important to make sure you get plenty of sunlight for your garden. So we're talking about the size of the garden. This is critical. So when we first started gardening, we was at a friend's property, and we was doing in-ground, and we just got a big eye, and we just went crazy. And then we realized halfway through the season, like, we're in trouble because we had stuff all over the place. So how much are you going to be planting? That is critical. That is something for you to decide. Also, this will determine how much space you would need and what type of your garden you would need. So depending on your size of what you want, would depend if you want in-ground, raised bed, or you want to do a container. Are you sharing your harvest with anybody? That's another idea to keep in mind as far as your size. And also time, and do you have helpers to help you? So if you're going to share your harvest with other people, then you might want a bigger garden. But at the same time, you want a bigger garden, especially going to do in-ground, you're going to need helpers. Raised beds, I think I have 7 or 8 at my house right now, and that's a lot to maintain and keep and going for one person. So it's something to keep in mind. If you're by yourself and it's just you in the house, 1 to 2 raised beds is probably good enough for you, and a couple of containers that have herbs on it on your deck or something like that. If a house of 4, you may want to plant bigger, depending on what you need, trying to eat or how much you're going to eat and stuff of that nature. So when to plant? Critical. And you also got to pay attention to the weather. So normally in the spring, you can go from March 1 to April 20th for your spring plants, so just your spring and fall plants. Then August 1st to September 15th for your fall plants. And this will be determined by how long it takes for each plant to grow. Each plant doesn't grow the same. So collards may take 65 days to be grown from seed. Radish, 20 days, and it's ready to go. Summer planting, May 1st to June 15th, and then companion planting. So if you remember last year here in Kansas City, we had snow for the first 3 weekends in April, and we had a hard freeze at the end of April. That pretty much killed the spring planting season for Kansas City. I couldn't get nothing going. I think I got one stuff planted, and then we had that sleet like the middle of April where we had like 2 inches of sleet, and it just killed everything. So then I had to turn around and get more plants, but by that time, you really do need March to get your plants to a full harvest, and Kansas City has not been incorporating the last couple of years, just to let y'all know. So, and then last year, we went from all the way hard freeze to the end of April, and then like 10 days later, it jumped to 90 degrees. So we didn't have a spring whatsoever in the back.
When there is a hard freeze like that, is there anything that we could do to save vegetation?
The question was asked, if there's a hard freeze, is there anything you can do to save your garden? There's a couple of things you can do, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I'll go ahead and mention it now. They have something called row covers. So if you have an in-ground garden or if you have raised beds, you can get something called row covers, and they will cover your plants and stuff like that, especially if they're like this. And they can, I think it raises the degrees in your garden by like 2 or 3 degrees. So if it's going to be a hard freeze, like 27 degrees, these row covers will protect it to that point. If you're down into the 20s, it's not going to work. And that's kind of what we had last year in April. So row covers, if you can't find row covers, you can do sheets. If you do old sheets, bed sheets, I would suggest, though, you find a system where you have something where you plant, if you got raised beds, you got some kind of stake on the outside of your raised bed so you can drop the sheets over that pin type thing so it's not sitting on your plants. Varied ways you can do that. I know some people who do hoops around their raised bed and put the roll covers on top of the sheets on top of the hoops. They'll drill it into the raised bed and then put the covers over that so it'll cover it that way. So there's a couple of different ways you can cover your plants. If you get freezes like 27, 28, 30, there's ways to protect your plants so they don't do that. Fall plants, your spring and fall plants are pretty hardy. Like garlic, I planted in the winter. They're hardy. They can withstand anything. Onions, pretty hardy plants. They can stand a freeze or two. Kale, surprisingly, kale is very resilient to hard freezes in winter. So we had a kale plant out in Holden. It survived the whole winter. It looked like it was dormant, but it came back next spring and came through. So kales are very hardy plants. So there's a couple of plants that can survive that. But yeah, normally row covers and sheets should be able to help with that. So the next thing we're going to talk about is choosing plants and seeds. So There's 3 types of ways you can go with this. There's heirlooms, usually applied to fruits. The difference with heirlooms is that they haven't been messed with. The seeds have not been messed with. So they're non-GMO. They're from the original plant. So they haven't been touched or altered in any way. Usually with heirloom plants, their seeds can grow plants for the next year. So that's why it's important to get heirloom plants. You can have organic plants also, organic seeds and plants. Organic is more of how you grow it versus kind of what it is. And then conventional seeds is wherever you get it from. So I made a mistake of getting some conventional seeds from Home Depot for my collards. And yeah, that didn't turn out very well. It was like January. Oh, they already got the plants out. I got excited. Let me go try these. And I put them in, and they didn't grow. Put them in, some more seeds in. They didn't grow. And I was sitting there thinking, like, okay. And by that time, the season was over with. So it's very important to know where you get your seeds from, because it could be you could be disappointed if you get the wrong types of seeds. And the reason we're saying this about the heirlooms is the best way to go, because your GMO seeds, there's 2 things wrong with GMO seeds. First and foremost, they are used to kill off certain insects. So if you get and there's videos out on YouTube, they'll show little insects eating GMO plants, and they'll show like 6 or 7 hours later that these insects will explode. Their stomachs would explode. That's one reason why you don't eat GMO type plants, because you don't know. One plant maybe, but you continuously eating that stuff, that will affect you eventually. Second, GMO, they're seedless. So you have to come back the next year to whoever you got the seeds from. They don't produce, or if they do produce seeds, they don't grow. So that's one of the reasons you want to go with heirloom type seeds. And then some of the places you can get them from, Baker's Creek, Bonnie's plants, which you probably start seeing those probably Monday, to be honest with you. They're in front of Home Depot, and then they're in front of Lowe's. So these are not, Bonnie's is not part of Home Depot. So the Home Depot seeds I got were Home Depot seeds. Bonnie plants are a separate organization, and their plants are non-GMO. So we already asked about that. Or some of us belong to the Kansas City Community Garden. Their stuff is organic and non-GMO also. So from here, these are some of the packages from Baker's Creek that Sister Danielle got. You got thyme, you got Tennessee green, tomatoes, jalapeno peppers, and mint. And the things about I would highly suggest that they give their catalogs out for free. I highly suggest y'all go look at these catalogs and get them for yourself, because they get seeds from overseas and stuff like that are still in their original state. And if you buy from them, seeds from them, a lot of times they'll put in free packets of seeds of other things. So you buy I forgot what we got last time, but we got about some spinach, and I got two free packets or something from them. So they're very good about trying to promote themselves. So, and I know they have a little festival every spring down in south of Springfield. So they're very good about being heirloom seeds, and they're very good about giving you free samples so you can try them. So these are generally your typical spring, fall planting plants. You have collards, you have broccoli, you have carrots, you have lettuce. You can have different types of lettuce, cilantro, spinach, kale, potatoes, arugula, cabbage, radish, onions, and then you can do strawberries, green beans, and then you can do other types of fruit also. Blueberries are a spring type, plant. So what you need to know, different plants have different growing times. Collards, broccoli, 65, 75 days. Carrots, about 50 days. Lettuce, 45 days. Spinach, about 45, 50 days. Potatoes, 80 or 90, something like that. Arugulas, about 30, I believe. 30 days, 35 days. Radishes, 20 days. And when they say it's ready in 20 days. You plant from seed, it's ready in 20 days. So when you plant it, make sure, so you can plant radishes all throughout the spring. You plant one row every week, and you'll have harvest every week. Strawberries, and then green beans, obviously. Your summer plants are your tomatoes, bell peppers, jalapenos, cucumbers, eggplant, zucchini, watermelon, cantaloupe, corn, sweet potatoes, black-eyed peas, and okra. So these are just, this is not the inclusive list. There's obviously a lot more things you can grow in the summer, but these are what people grow the most. Tomatoes, depending on the variety, will go from anywhere from 70 to 85 days, something like that. Jalapenos, about 60 days. Watermelons are 100, cantaloupes about 90, 95. So if you want watermelon, you're going to plant those back in early May from seed, unless you get a watermelon plant, and then you may be able to get away with it in the May. But those need to be in the ground by May sometime. So seed probably early May, and they'll grow because they won't be ready until at the end of August, early September for watermelon. Cantaloupes are about 10 days less. Cucumbers are on here also. I didn't put cucumbers, sorry, I didn't put cucumbers, but cucumbers also. They need their own, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Watermelon and cantaloupes, they need their own space. They vine and they grow out. They're almost like peppermint plants, that type of deal. So if you're going to do in-ground, we usually have 5 feet apart between rows for watermelon plants because they'll string out from here to the back of the church if it grows that much. So one of the things to keep in mind, cucumbers, yes?
Is that from one seed? Or
One seed.
one seed will produce?
One seed, 5. 5 watermelons. It could be more.
Like,
Full, yes. Yes.
So it depends.
I'm asking because if I'm doing a canister,
No, no.
You can't do that with a container.
a big one.
You can do a big pot, but it will vine out. And just, they have runners, they call them runners.
Okay.
And they run.
Yeah, that would be good for apartment.
No. The question was, can you do a watermelon plant in a container in an apartment? And unfortunately, the answer is no. You need to have, even a raised bed is tough to do it in a raised bed. So I plant mine in the corner of my raised bed where I had my eggplants, and it just took over my eggplants. I still got eggplants, but it took over everything. So just one of the things to keep in mind. If you have more questions, you can ask us afterwards. Run through these right quick. So went through the organic or not organic. Organic also means planting, so you're not using chemicals and stuff on your garden. You're using natural stuff. Companion planting to drive away pests. Companion planting to keep to help your plants grow. We want to get away from chemicals because when time comes, we're going to move out to the country. We need to have the skill set of knowing what grows together and what doesn't grow together type of deal. So that's what organic means in that sense also. Next, we're going to soil preparation.
Okay, so the importance of soil preparation is the fact that it's your foundation. It's what feeds your garden. This is where you really want to make sure that you get your foundation right, because if you can get your soil right, then half the battle is over, okay? And think about that too from a spiritual aspect, okay? If I get my foundation, my spiritual life, if I get that in order, then I can be a blessing and I can start helping others where I'm planting the seed. The Holy Spirit is working on that seed, and then there's that harvest. But if I don't have my foundation right, and I'm sitting up here and I'm also trying to plant seeds, I might come across that time where I got some that grow and some that don't. So it's the same thing about a physical garden. Turn with me to Ezekiel 17:8. I know some of you, we have it on the screen, but we also need to get in the habit of finding these things in the Bible. Because we won't always have this technology, but we can carry that book with us to the hills. Ezekiel 17:8. All right. I hear a few more pages. Okay, are we there? Say amen. Ezekiel 17:8, this is the King James Version, says this: It was planted in a good soil by great waters that it might bring forth branches, and that it might bear fruit, that it might be a goodly vine. That's going back to when I said good soil, that it might bear fruit. We have to have that good soil. And it's the same thing with our gardens. Soils are essential for life in the sense that they provide the medium for plant growth, habitat for many insects and other organisms, and they act as a filtration system for surface water, carbon store, and maintenance of atmospheric gases. I want to point out about the filtration system for surface water. When it comes to gardening, and this is also with in-ground, you don't want your soil so packed and tight, okay? Because then that makes water just sit, okay? So even with raised beds, this is very critical and key for raised beds, is you want that soil to always be loose, okay? So that's why, especially when we show you the soil recipe, peat moss, leaves, old leaves, like some of the leaves here, grab some, keep you a bag, make sure they're all dried out, because they keep your soil from sticking, from packing. They keep it loose. It keeps it crumbly, so that when the rain falls, especially in a raised bed, it goes past all that coarse stuff and then just flows out. And that's what you want to make sure happens, because if water sits, then it also drains the nutrients as well. Then it overwaters your plants. You want that plant to get its necessary water source, but you don't want it to stay around for days, especially if it's raining. Because if it rains, especially during the springtime, even when that first water came, guess what? There's more water coming. So that water needs to move out. Okay? So a couple of tips about soil. Soil provides plants with minerals and nutrients. It provides air for gaseous exchange between roots and atmosphere. It protects the plants from erosion and other destructive physical and biological and chemical activity. And the soils hold water, moisture, and maintain an adequate aeration. Now, on the screen is the soil recipe that we have used for years. And this has not failed me yet. Just like God will never fail you, this recipe will never fail you. This recipe is actually an organic soil recipe, okay? It's really pretty simple. It's topsoil, peat moss, an animal compost manure. Okay, this one on the screen has cow manure, but also chicken poop falls into that as a type of animal manure. And then what I was telling you earlier is the shredded leaves and the grass clippings. Now, I know it says grass clippings. I don't trust that, okay? Because one, I know I'm protecting my garden to be organic, but I don't know what has been going on in the grass for years, okay? I didn't have this house from day one since it was built, okay? So and then two, you've got your neighbors, okay? And they may use chemicals to keep their grass from growing weed. Well, when it rains, if you live in a community where there's a hill, guess what happens? Your neighbor's chemicals start washing down and passing through everybody's yard, and it keeps on going. So you're not guaranteed to always keep your environment in that area, that aspect of your grass, chemical free. So, but you can control your raised bed area, okay? So for a simple 4x8, this recipe shows that you would need 4 bags of topsoil, and on average, topsoil per bag is about $2 or less, okay? And then your 2 pails of peat moss, it says 3 cubic feet. I tell you now, to take out the guesswork of cubic and all that, Home Depot sells it in a 3 cubic square. And it runs you about anywhere between $10 and $12. So you're just going to need one. It is kind of heavy and it's very bulky, okay? So ladies, if you're trying to do this by yourselves, I would highly suggest you get someone to partner up with you and at least go get this, okay? 2 ladies can easily lift 3 cubic feet of peat moss, okay? It's not that quite heavy. And then the 4 bags of topsoil, they're about like this, okay, and about like that. And usually you can just at least fling one over your forearm is good, okay? here's the other thing when you are picking up supplies for your garden, okay? Especially, this is across the board, men, women. Use your legs, don't use your back, okay? And I would highly suggest that you practice that before you roll up to, the garden center and pick up. Practice, okay? How does that feel? Use your legs. I'm gonna give you an example of how to use your legs, okay? You're bent down, all right? Now feel the pressure in the bottom heel of your foot. Use that and push up. That's using your legs. Now, if you're back down here and you use your toes and you bend forward, guess what? You used your back. And guess what comes up first? The back. Okay? So you always want to use your legs. Gardening is also fitness. Okay? And a lot of principles that you're going to learn and use in gardening, you can also use these at the gym. Okay? And I can tell you about that after service. Okay, so here's an example of me prepping a raised bed. As you can see, this is going to be a lot of work, okay? So I have my bags, all right? And one of the things that Elder Nate said, when you think about raised beds, keep in mind, you're going to be hauling bags, okay? Now, this is in the back. So I have two options. Luckily for me, where I stay, I have an empty field in the back. So I can either roll a truck up on the backside, or if I'm by myself, I end up parking in the front. I carry one of those bags. Now you see how big my garden is. So I'm looking at roughly at least a good 20 bags. So I pick one up, I'll walk around the front, I'll walk through the side, I go to the back, drop it. Walk back to the front, pick up another bag, walk to the back and drop it. So planting a garden is also a workout. Okay, keep that in mind. Because I know y'all, I don't want y'all to get all into it, and then y'all get them bags and you try to get back there, and then y'all be like, okay, they didn't tell us about this. I'm quite upset. I didn't know it was going to be like this. But if you're putting in the work, like I said, your work will not be for naught. Okay, so here's the raised beds. And also, too, I should tell you this. Remember the picture we showed before? We had a flat tarp, and I had the raised beds on top to keep any grass from growing. Now what I've also added is rubber mulch. Now, rubber mulch versus wood mulch, okay? The mulch keeps grass from growing, all right? The difference between the two is if you have wood mulch, you're going to be looking at probably bringing in, you have to replenish the mulch every year because it's natural. It's wood. It breaks down. It's also susceptible to termites because it's wood. So especially when you're doing a raised bed and you decide that you're going to go and use mulch, make sure you keep it away from the house. You want it far away. Now, I chose to use rubber mulch because I'm like, ain't nobody got time for that. Okay? I don't have time to be bringing in mulch every year when I'm already going to be also carrying bags of soil to kind of replenish the nutrients every year. Rubber mulch lasts anywhere from 10 to 15 years. Okay? It's shredded tire. Okay? And it's safe. It's safe to have around your garden. What's nice about it, too, is when you have raised beds, you can kneel, okay, and work on your garden. Well, with rubber mulch, I don't have to worry about garden pads for my knees because it's cushy. So when I walk or when I bend on it, it gives, but it provides the proper shock absorbent. So now, rubber mulch does cost more, understandably so, because you're paying for the longevity, whereas regular mulch is cheap, and you're going to be replacing that every year. Okay? But if you look at your investment by doing that, you've already paid for rubber mulch by year 2. Okay? So here's where I have the big peat moss. Remember I was telling you about the peat moss and how it looks? That big giant square you see in the back, that's 1 3 cubic foot of peat moss. Now, that one, though, will do the first 4 beds, the 1, 2, 3, 4. So what you don't see is later on I had to go back and get 2 more peat moss, 1 for this 4 square, and then half of it for the one in the back. So that's kind of like how you're placing your bags and getting your soil recipe mixed together. Now, this is a little bit of a harder way of doing this because you have to mix that soil, okay? I didn't have a barrel. Now, if you want to do this, I would highly suggest getting a wheelbarrow that you can dump all this in and kind of use your shovel and mix it. rather than doing it this way. Because at this rate, I'm going to have to pour each bag, and then I use my gloves in my hands, and I'm squatted over like this, like football style, and I'm trying to mix it, okay? Which that's working your shoulders and your arms. That's a bit much, so I would suggest if you can, get a barrel, okay?
Bad dirt.
Let's see here. So, we're going into garden maintenance. Now that you've got your soil, now that you have planned your planting, you're going to put your plants there, you need to learn how to maintain and watch things inside your garden and how to keep track of that. Because, you know, like we said, if you overwater, you could end up destroying, you know, your garden, okay? So there's a couple of tips on how the best way to water your garden. You can't stop the rain, okay? Rain is great. Farmers, they pray for rain, okay? But especially in the summertime when it comes to tomatoes, you can't stop the rain from hitting the leaves, okay? But when it's up to you to water, you want to keep a low pressure with your hose if you can and stay at the roots, okay? Especially with tomatoes. I'm going to tell you why. Even if the dirt, if you've got your hose on full power and you say you're focused at the bottom, it's going to splatter, okay? And when that dirt splatters, it splatters up, okay? And it gets on the leaves. If that sits on the leaves, it causes a mildew. And what mildew does, especially on a tomato plant, you got to think your plants are like a channel, a communication source, okay? They send it signals everywhere up that plant. So does mildew. Mildew will start on one leaf. It'll go and flow this way. Next thing you know, it goes up the stalk, and now it's starting to spread, and then it goes into the fruit, okay? So when it comes to your tomatoes, you want to treat them as gentle as a baby, okay? Now, rather than trying to figure out, okay, don't get the water, here's a way of eliminating that stress. A soaker hose, okay? The soaker hose, just lay it in your garden bed, and it has tiny little pinholes. Kind of feels rough, okay? But it has tiny little pinholes in it. And you can just you can turn your hose on full blast, but the hose is made to control how much water seeps out. And then it just drips. And what it does is it drips down to the root source. So you never have to worry. Now, the key thing is, if you can, is now that we're talking about this now, if you plan on doing a garden, put the soaker hose in first before you put your plants in. The reason why I say that is if you get your plants in, now you're going to be trying to gently try to lay the hose in between without breaking your plant. Okay? So put the soaker hose in first and then use that as a guide to plant around the soaker hose. Okay? And so in this picture, it might be a little hard to see here, but for those that are watching this live or whatever, they can kind of see the water dripping slowly out of the hose. This right here is, and actually this is my calendar. This was last year, that's May 2018. Some of the things I highly suggest you guys get a planner or a calendar. I use Google, I use my Google Calendar. In this calendar, I keep track of these things. When it rains, because that's a day that I didn't have to water, okay? And then when I water, when I plant it, because remember, when you lay your seeds out and you're looking at when you plant, you need to keep track of that because you need to know when it's time to harvest. Especially if you're doing companion planting, it kind of gets confusing, okay? Just because you planted 2 vegetables in the same bed at the same time doesn't mean they get harvested at the same time, okay? So it's very key that you keep track of that. And then I also keep track of when I did pest control and also when I added nutrients. And nutrients, I mean chicken poop. Now, y'all heard us talk about chicken poop. I wanted to show you what chicken poop looks like. Now, this is after chicken poop dries. This is not what chicken poop looks like when it first comes out, okay? Yeah, all right. Now, key thing, I don't want y'all going out here getting all excited about chicken poop. You guys got friends who got farms and like, hey, you got chickens? Great. Can I have the poop? No, wait. You can't put the chicken poop in your garden when it's fresh because it will burn your plants. It's too high in nitrogen. It's the same thing with cow manure. You can't just go out there and wait for the cow to do his business. It's like, I need that, and then go and run. It will burn, okay? These things need time to air out and dry out, okay? And that's when the nitrogen levels start to come down, okay? So when it's hard, it looks like this, okay? And you can get this, as I was researching this online, you can order it in boxes. Now, I personally would be like, I don't know if I would subject someone to ship that in their truck to my house. I wouldn't do it. So your community gardens here in the KC metro area, also there's some in Kansas, City, Kansas, Blue Springs, and Independence. They have it. And it's cheap. It's cheap. Now, when we get into the country, let me tell you, you want some chickens, okay? You want the chickens for the eggs, but you also want the chickens because they provide a natural nutrient that is going to be very helpful to your garden. Farmers use it, okay? There's just some things that you're gonna need. When we laugh and we talk about Lion King and the whole circle of life, let me tell you, God created animals, bugs, pests for certain reasons. I get it. I don't like bugs, but there's some bugs that you need to let live. For example, we're going to get into pests. You need to keep the hornet and the wasp around in your garden. I'm going to tell you why, especially in the summertime. Because they go for the tomato hornworm. And they sting that hornworm, and one of them lays an egg in the hornworm, and then it explodes. So if you didn't want to use chemicals or powders, or you're trying to be cost effective, and if you're in a good area and you see these bugs and it's around and you see, and I'm telling you something, you'll know a tomato hornworm, it gets about at least this long, it gets about this fat, and it has little black dots, look like a bunch of eyeballs, just all the way down. And at the end of that worm is it looks like a stinger, and it's about this long. Well, if you want, let the hornet and the wasps take care of him. But what I usually do, because that's a big thing to kill, it doesn't feel good So what I usually do is, it has hands, it has a bunch of hands all down the length of his body. I pull it off, and I take him and I go put him somewhere far down the field, and he will literally, you'll see all his hands do like this, and he will grab on to whatever you just put him on. So if you're that much in love with nature and you don't like killing them, you can take them somewhere else and let them grab on to something else. But that is chicken poop.
All right, so another thing about garden maintenance is dealing with your raised beds. So this is where I was in Holden. So when we first got there, the lady had raised beds. This was 8 feet long, maybe 4 or 5 feet wide, probably about 5 or 6 feet wide. So we was out there. So she had it for like 3 or 4 years. I came along, planted on it for a couple of years, and you can see it fell apart. So part of garden maintenance is repairing your raised beds. So with the help of my youngest daughter, I had to rebuild my raised bed. So this was probably about 1 foot high, 8 feet long. And one of the things I didn't show was because if you can't see it on this picture, but it's kind of on the incline, so that's why it kind of fell apart in the front. I actually had to take a shovel and dig that dirt out so I can get those comment boards fit around my raised bed. So not only maintenance about your garden, it's also maintenance about your raised beds, equipments, and stuff of that nature. So next we're going to talk about harvesting and storage. So we got to have a schedule to harvest. You got to require space and equipment and kitchen gadgets, tips on harvesting, and ways of storing harvest. So in Revelation 13, 16 through 17, it says, "And he calls all both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads." And 17 says, "And that no man might buy or sell, say he that have the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name." So it's going to get to a point where you're not going to be able to buy and sell. And you got to be able to grow your own stuff to make sure that you can survive. So one of the things real quick was something I saw in the news last week was in Venezuela. Because, that whole country is kind of falling apart. the dictator there now has told all grocery stores that all citizens need to have an ID to purchase food. So I'm just saying this because we need to keep this stuff in mind, because if you remember last summer, everybody was laughing at President Trump because what he say? He said, oh, you just need an ID, somebody getting an ID to go buy food. And everybody started laughing at him because, oh, you just a rich guy and you don't understand you don't need ID to go to the grocery store. I'm just saying, keep that in the back of your mind, because right now the United States is $22 trillion in debt. So that's coming due. So we want to make sure then that we have a plan in place. So when everything goes south, you already have something in place and you're not scrambling at the last minute, because you're scrambling at the last minute, it's pretty much too late. So one reason I'm saying that, because a lot of these plants that we're talking about, you can grow within a season. But if you want fruit trees, fruits, they usually take a few years. Fruit trees, 3 to 5 years before they produce fruit. More like 4 to 5 years. Strawberries, blueberries, and so they're produced that year, but they produce better that second year. So you need to be thinking ahead on how you're going to start doing things. So have a schedule to harvest. Planning calendar. You can get those on your apps. Go to the app store. They got free apps. On planning calendars, you can put where the day that you plant and how long it takes to harvest. It'll be on the packet, and it'll plan out to the day where you can harvest for the most part. 2, have a day of the week that you want to harvest. You're not going to be able, when you're ready to harvest, you're not going to be able to do this in 1 to 2 hours. It's not a 1 to 2 hour and then I'm going to go on with the rest of my day. This is probably going to take at least at minimum a half a day, if not a full day, depending on what you're harvesting. Collards, it takes a while to harvest collards. I mean, it harvests collards, but then you got to cook them for 3 minutes, and you got to cool them down in an ice bucket, and then from there you can store it. Tomatoes, especially if you want to do tomato sauce. I've done tomato sauce with my wife. That is not an easy process. I'm going to tell you this right now, because you got to boil them, then you got to peel them, and then you got to take a strainer and you got to mash all the water out so it's not your sauce is not watery. And then she squeezes it again, and then she does something else to it. And we was there for like 3 or 4 hours, and this was like one batch. And then tomatoes, they come in bunches. They just come. Once you start picking stuff, they just come. So you're going to need a day set aside to harvest your stuff. Whether if it's not a Sunday, then a Tuesday or something, you're just going to know that half that day is going to be going harvesting stuff. Next thing, freezer. You will need a separate freezer for your harvest. You will not be able to harvest, you will not be able to store your harvest in the freezer section of your refrigerator. You know, they had a little separate thing. You need to go buy a separate freezer for your stuff. It doesn't have to be the most expensive either. Everybody think you gotta go get the fanciest freezer. The freezer we have is from Janae's coworker. We paid $50 for it. She wasn't using it for like a year and a half. That was 8 or 9 years ago, and we're still using it. So you don't have to go get the most expensive thing, but you will need a deep freezer, either a standing one or one that we had to bend open the top and bend over. Next thing, a food sealer. My wife bought a food sealer last year. It is a good investment to get. It will cost a little bit of money, but it's well worth it because it will preserve your harvest. Because once you harvest certain things, you got a certain amount of time to do something with it before it goes bad. If you get a food sealer, it saves you a couple of months to see, a month or 2 months, depending on what you get to harvest everything. Pressure cooker, pressure canner versus water canner. There's a pressure canner where you pressurize stuff for your food storage. And then there's a canning bath, a water canning bath where you boil water and you put food and you put a seal on a bottle, a jar with a seal, and you put it in the water and it boils till it pressurizes and sucks the air out of it. The water stuff is more towards, a lot of times we do jalapenos with that. Your pressure canner, you do vegetables if you want to store your vegetables. Now, pressure canner, not pressure cooker. You can get a pressure cooker with a pressure canner, but you cannot use a pressure cooker to can stuff. It will explode. If you don't know, so if you're gonna get a pressure cooker, you can get one with a canning feature, or you're going to get a pressure canner, make sure you are getting a pressure canner and not mistakenly picking up a pressure cooker, because it would explode, you could get injured, and you can destroy half your kitchen. So keep that in mind. And then tips for harvesting, like I said, food sellers. Some vegetables, you need to keep your dirt on the vegetables. It'll store keep longer. So potatoes, carrots, sweet potatoes, beets, radishes, if you keep the dirt on them, they'll last longer. I know my potatoes, I just leave the dirt on them when I pull them out of the garden, and they'll last a couple of months, like a month or so, or maybe 2 months, depending on. And then make sure you're storing them in a cool spot. So not only do you harvest them, keep the dirt on them, but keep it in a cool spot. Even your canning stuff, make sure it's in a cool spot. We have some of our spaghetti sauce on top of a ledge in our kitchen, but it was near a light. So when we opened one of the spaghetti sauce, it had a little bit of mold on it because it was near the light source. So make sure that you keep the dirt on it and you keep it in a cool spot. And again, like we said, when you harvest, they come in bunches. So this is from the Nelsons. From there, one of their harvests. As you can see here, all of those over there are cucumbers on the seal. You can see how many she has. And then tomatoes on the side. I think there were Big Boy.
And when Elder Nate said, when you start picking, it starts coming, Boston pickling cucumbers will do this. The first 5 you pull, get ready, because here comes 10. And then after you pull 10, here comes 18. Wow. It goes fast. So you need to have a plan on what you're going to do, because these harvests get bigger and bigger because it sends a signal to the plant saying, keep growing, keep producing. So that's what that was. And we ended up with a lot of pickles.
San Marzanos, same thing. These are Roma type tomatoes. These are what we use for tomato sauce. You start pulling those, they come in bunches. And San Marzano tomatoes are probably about that big. They're long and slender, but they're about that big. And when I say they come in bunch, I mean, I can pull like 50 off of one plant. I can come back a couple of days later, there's like 75 on the plant. So they come once on the tomato plant. Once you see that yellow flower come, that's a potential for a tomato. So remember that. So once you start pulling stuff, them flowers just come everywhere. Another harvest for them was their collards and their kale. And with the collard plants, you don't have to pull the collard plants. You just break them off at the bottom, and they'll just keep growing. When I plant mine in the spring, I make sure I keep it watered through the summer. It'll go dormant. It'll come back in the fall with even bigger leaves. So that's why you can plant collards again in the fall if you want to, but if you're diligent about your ones in the spring and make sure they keep a good water source and their roots have water to it, it'll come back once that first cool snap hit in the fall, they'll come back to life. So it's one of the things to keep in mind. For me, that were my sweet potatoes when I was out in Holden. That's probably like half my harvest. I had another harvest probably just as much as that, if not bigger. So when you pull them out, so sweet potatoes is like, as you can see, I still have the dirt on them from that. From last year, bell peppers. So at the top were my green bell peppers, and then the other 2 bags are red and orange bell peppers. And that was just from one harvest. When we did that, we had, because we like bell peppers, we had like probably 10 bags altogether, harvesting stuff like that. So we had a lot. And this is my garlic that I grow every year. I grow enough garlic where I don't have to get garlic from the store. So I haven't had garlic from the store in probably 2 or 3 years now. So I grow enough for the whole year. So I already got my garlic and you usually plant your garlic. Community garden says first day of winter you plant, first day of summer you pull. If it goes off, you'll know because once it's ready, you can't see the tips, but it'll have like a little anvil at the top. And that's when you know they're ready because that's seeds in the anvil, and it'll pop out and let them drop on the ground if you want to. We have pest control and animal control as we try to wind this down. One of the ways you control your pests is through companion planting. One of the things I learned with my collards, if I plant onions down the center of my collards and my broccoli, it keeps away the white butterfly for the most part. Something I experimented with, and I was out in Holden. I said, let me try this, see what happens, because the garlic and the onions put out a very pungent smell that drives away a lot of different things. Organic type application on plants, dipple dust. There's a liquid version of that. Chicken wire, is rough to work with, but I highly suggest that you use it because most animals, because they got the pads on them, on their bottom of their feet. They don't like that feeling of chicken wire on their pads. So you're talking about deer, you're talking about rabbits, you're talking about a lot of different animals. So that's very important that you do that. Dogs and cats, because especially in the country, you need cats to keep out the field mice. That's about the only way I know of, unless somebody can direct me another way. But cats are the most way of doing that. And then country living, you want your garden in open space. It protects. It's like a natural barrier. So if you have your garden in open space and not near woods, then the rabbits have to travel a lot further. And in country, you get hawks and eagles that dive down and get them. So that's why you want to do that. And then we'll talk about, because you need some type of weapons in the country. I'm just sorry, what you do.
Okay, so here, this is an example of companion planting pest control, okay? So in this raised bed, I have collards and kale. And what I used is marigolds all the way around. And marigolds keep pests and certain bugs and insects away, especially mosquitoes. I'm gonna tell you, it's very important when you're doing raised beds or even in ground, if you are getting a lot of rain, mosquitoes like to sit in pools of water. And if you have pools of water hiding in pockets in your garden bed, that's a breeding source for them to lay and hatch more mosquitoes. But mosquitoes don't like marigolds. So I had those planted around in my garden bed. Now, again, I think I shared with you in the first series, don't make the mistake that I did. Pay attention when you're buying your marigolds. There's two types. There's the regular marigolds, and then there's the big marigolds. But if you're not paying attention to that little stick sticking out when you're buying your little 6-pack of marigolds, and you get them in your garden, and then you're wondering, wow, these marigolds are getting kind of big. That's beautiful. Wow, they're getting bigger. You go back and you look at that little stick, and you be like, you planted big marigolds. So these, I thought, these are just babies, what you see here. Now, regular marigolds will stop at this size, but big marigolds, that's a baby for all those, and they will get as big as that collard plant, the big marigolds. And I accidentally put those in the corner, and what happened is those marigold plants got so big, I couldn't even hug one, and it started to push on the wall of my raised beds. So what I ended up having to do was go in, dig, break them apart, and actually I had to just take some of the marigolds out. Now, if you've got other places or you want to put them in little pots and use them as decor, maybe in the front of your house for landscape, use them. They're great. They're very hardy. So, but that's an example of companion planting pest control. That is an example of, you remember when Elder Nate said, you don't want the white butterfly? This is what the white butterfly does. In about 10 days, the white butterfly, yeah, it looks all pretty, it's fluttering around. You want to kill and catch that, or you want to catch that sucker and kill it. Because what it'll do is, as quick as it lands, she can lay eggs within the hour. Then what they do is, they like to lay the eggs underneath the leaf. So to you, you're like, well, nothing's happened. No, you don't see what's going on underneath. And she lays it in like a jelly pack. And it's like 40, 50 eggs at least in a small little patch. They hatch. If they get water, they hatch, and you see these tiny, tiny little green little worms. They get bigger. How they get bigger is they're feeding off your collards. And the bigger they get, the bigger holes they make. And then next thing you know, instead of collards, you have a green version of Swiss cheese. Not only that, the worms they poop. And they go down and they like to put the poop down in the stalk, down where you're going to break your collards off, and they get it down in there. Okay? So this is why you want to kill the white butterfly. Now, you can recover from this because collards are hardy. So you see the center, that little baby clusters, that's new leaves. So what I did was I broke all that off. Don't be scared. It's going to look like I lost everything. You haven't. If you've done the right thing and now sprinkled your like dipple dust or something on there to protect it, you will get a batch of greens that grow back big and healthy. But you can't save that when that happens. And then for pest control, when we were talking about animals and this and that, so if you can see, you see these green stakes. There's a, like what I use is called a green fencing. A lot of farmers use this too. It's made in a way where at the bottom of the fencing, the holes are about like this. The holes don't get big like this to the very top. The reason why that fence is made like this is so that rabbits and small animals can't fit through the bottom because they want to stay on the ground. They're not going to hop and climb. Raccoons will climb, but not rabbits, okay? So I've got a couple of things here. 2 things that I'm doing here. One is I'm keeping the rabbits out, and I'm also, if you've got a dog, I'm training my dog that this area you don't go in, okay? Because dogs, they like vegetables. Don't underestimate them. They really love vegetables. They actually will eat healthy. My dog, she loves greens. She loves broccoli. She don't like tomatoes. But what I've done is I've trained her that you don't go in there unless mama is in there. So she knows when she gets to that, she stops. She walks around, and now she's getting to the point where she's starting to guard that area. She doesn't like any other animal going there because she can't go in there. That's her deal. But when I open the front, she even now learns to wait. And when I walk in, she'll look at me, and I'm like, come on, you can come on in. So using this fencing, you're keeping out animals, and you can also train your house pets. The rubber mulch is keeping out the grass and the weeds because the grass and the weeds bring bugs. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so the question was from the audience is, what do you do about skunks and squirrels? Okay, so there is skunk repellent. I don't live in an area currently where I have to deal with that. I have to deal with rabbits, which is really a pain because rabbits love fruit, especially strawberries. I would say, and again, me and Elder Nate don't have the answers for everything. I always, if I don't know and I'm at my wits with an animal that I have never encountered, I always go to any of the soil service centers and I talk to those guys. Okay, I was like, help me. One of the things that will help when you go talk to one of your, to people that are at these stores, take a picture. It is critical because them trying to guess what you're trying to describe is very hard. And if you're not a good person who can describe and actually know these things, it's really that person taking a chance that you're giving them the right info. So take a picture on your phone and show them what you're dealing with. I highly suggest this method, especially if you're trying to repair your grass, because there's like all kinds of different families of grass, and you just don't want to be going in and grabbing grass seed. You got all this nice fluffy stuff, and then you got this rough looking stuff over here. But back to your question, ma'am, about the skunk and the squirrels. Squirrels, especially with your fruit trees, they have a net that you can place over your bushes or over your trees, okay? Now, city squirrels are getting they adapt. They fly. They also aren't scared of the nets now, okay? So it just kind of depends. I would say, again, reach out and at the Soil Service Center or your home improvement stores and ask. Yes, ma'am?
Squirrels don't like mothballs. Throw some mothballs.
So one of the suggestions from the audience was mothballs. Squirrels don't like the smell of mothballs. The only thing is that if you have a house pet and your area is not guarded, mothballs are poisonous to your house pet. So you have to be very careful when doing that. Yes, ma'am. Cayenne pepper. Another suggestion from the audience was cayenne pepper. Now, that definitely works with squirrels. What you can't see in this photo on the screen for those that are, are watching this, there's also this rabbit repellent, and because, again, I have a dog, okay, I have to be very careful what I use in my garden. So they actually make a rabbit repellent that is safe to have around your pets, but it keeps deer and rabbit away. And one of the key ingredients is cayenne pepper. Now, let your dog sniff that one time up their nose. They won't go back again. They're going to sneeze, it's going to burn, and they'll never do it again, even if they lick it. But here's the problem with using those natural products is rain. Once it rains, it's natural, it soaks, you will have to put that down again, okay? And then another way of keeping weeds, which then brings bugs, is the weed blocker. keeping that down underneath keeps stuff from growing up into your garden. I can't highly suggest this enough because this will keep your weeding down to bare minimum to 0. Okay? You don't have to worry about that because pulling weeds is tedious.
All right, so a situation I was trying to show, and I'm not sure if I can show this. I have chicken wire around my garden. This is my house in Lee Summit. So one of the things I suggest when you start a garden is to pray over it. Because last year we was on a tornado warning in Lee Summit, and normally I don't. I'm kind of like wherever, but I have my German Shepherd downstairs, and so came over to the TV. Oh, tornado coming down 470. Okay. Little dog is always yapping. The big dog started yapping. So now I was like, okay, then we got a problem. So I brought him inside. We was in the garage, and we inside down in the basement and the lower level. And then for like a minute, we heard like, bah, 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 bah. And then we came outside. That, what you see right there on the bottom, is from the other side of my yard, from my neighbor's. That's my neighbor's fence on the other side. So it flew over, hit my raised bed right there, and then broke because I got a post, steel post, and it broke that post. Well, fortunately, I was able to, where you see the second raised bed where my onions were, I was able to replant my onions, and I still got a good onion harvest. And then it missed most of the stuff in there. So all that stuff, and it missed everything. So, so one of the things, pray over your garden when you first start. When we came on the deck, all of our deck furniture was in a little circle. So we had like a little small twister hit down where we was at, and it did that. So what I was trying to show was chicken wire in this, but also just, again, maintenance. So I had to replace a couple of the steel posts, redo the chicken wire. And unfortunately, because it took my apartment place, my home maintenance people forever to fix the fence, it took like 2 months. I had infestation of rabbits in my garden because usually I have my dog outside and he usually take care of that. So it's one of the things you got to remember in that. So this is my dog, Samson. He's about 95 pounds. So, yeah. So the garden, and holding the garden is right next to it. So I really didn't have any problems. You will need something like this in the country. You will need a dog in the country. You will need some kind of big dog in the country. Because you get a small dog, you got eagles that will come down and take your small dog and go away with it. So you will need a big dog. 95 pounds, that's probably the smallest. You probably need something a little bigger than that. So one of the things I'm saying that because he'll keep rabbits away, stuff like that, but he also we're in the country, now you're dealing with foxes, coyotes, and stuff like that. One morning, it was like 5 in the morning, I usually let him out, and he was out there barking, and it was a rabbit. It's kind of like a high-pitched bark, but with a low, he barked very low, so something was out there. I went outside, I had a flashlight, I looked down the path, and there was 2 coyotes coming down the path, because my neighbor has chickens. He had bought chickens, so they was coming down the path trying to get to the chicken. But he started barking, and so I was able to, once I flashed the flashlight, they turned around and went away. Also in the country, you need a LED flashlight, not a regular flashlight, because you need it in a bigger area and you need it brighter. So one of the things to need to look at, you will need some type of, I can see you, hold on a second. You need a type of rifle out there. I will believe the further you get out in the country, you will need something to handle some of the things that come down. You don't know where the Lord may send you. Lord might say, go here, go there. If you're further out in the country, then you're talking about mountain lions, cougars, and stuff of that nature. You will need some kind of high-power assault rifle to kind of deal with that.
I was going to say a little handgun or from anywhere from a 9 or a shotgun.
Yeah. So mentioning audience, the types of guns you might have, maybe a 9mm or maybe a shotgun. Shotgun and rifle is usually probably what you would need out there. If you don't like guns for obvious reasons, then maybe a high power bow or something you're gonna need something. That's all I'm saying. Or have a few of these. The handle will come your way. But like I said, the further you get out, they may become a warning system versus a defense system. So something to keep in mind as you go out, as we make way out into the country. Like I said, we were part of the Kansas City Community Garden, so this is their web address. Anybody can join. It is based on income level. If you're outside the income level, then I think it's like $12 to join a year, something like that. It's nothing ridiculous. 10 free seed packets, and then you get like a plant, 3 plants for like $1. So it's real cheap. The reason they did it in the city, because I know we're running out of time. In the cities, they call things called food deserts, where people can get healthy food, healthy type food. So we call it food desert. So one of the reasons they did a community garden in the city was for people around the community in this inner city could start growing gardens so they can eat more healthier. So that was the purpose of the Kansas City Community Garden. Go back because some of them read here. So they have roll covers, chicken poop. They have straw, organic type pest control, organic seed starters, potatoes, onions, stuff like that. So actually, I'm going Tuesday to get my potatoes and onions, and then pay my $12 and then get my 10 free seed packets. You place orders ahead of time for blueberries, strawberries, sweet potatoes, garlic. You got the vegetable plants, and then discounts on purposes. Also, on your seed packets, you need to know how long you had them. So if you have seed packets longer than 4 years, the seeds are probably not as good. I usually toss my seeds after 4 years because I'm always constantly going to get more. And we didn't even get into this, but you can ask afterwards. But you also need to get into the habit of saving your seeds, especially if you got heirloom type plants. You save your seeds, then you can just use those next year to plant.
If you're in an apartment and you use a container, how often do you have to use or change chicken?
You use a container. If you just use a little chicken poop in the container or something like that, probably once for that year is probably good. I don't think you have to use it again because it's such a small container. Well, okay, so the question was asked, if you have a container, how much chicken poop do you add to it? You plant the plants and then you put the chicken, I would say put the chicken poop in towards the beginning.
You can't put it in there in the beginning and not in a container because it'll be too much.
Okay, so I mean,
Well, it depends.
I wouldn't say a small plant. Let me rephrase that. If you got a small starter plant, no, you don't put chicken poop in
Right.
there. You wait till it grows a little bit, and then you put the chicken poop in. All I'm saying is you don't have to add a lot of chicken poop if you got a container, because that'll probably last the whole season.
It depends on the size of your container.
Yeah, size of your container. So you're talking about a container like this, that may be enough for the year, depending on how much you put in. But you don't want to put a lot in, because usually when you're talking about chicken poop, when you're talking about in-ground, you're talking about raised bed. It'll disperse through the dirt and disperse out. So sometimes that's why you come back maybe a second application halfway through the season. So like my chicken poop lasts me the whole season. I get like a 5-pound bag and it lasts the whole season. And you see how many raised beds I had. That's nothing you apply every 2 weeks. That's twice a season if you got in-ground or raised bed. Containers, I would say once the plant gets a sufficient size. And then from there, because it doesn't dissolve right away, it takes weeks for that. It takes several weeks for that to dissolve away. So that's one of the things about chicken poop. It takes a while to dissolve away. It's not you put it in, it's gone next week type of deal. You can go put it down, come back a month later, and still see some chicken poop still there. And then you just let it be and just continue on what you're doing. So that's a good question. So very good question. Yes.
You can always, I know this is going to sound gross, but you can get a container and put the chicken poop in there and put water in it, and then use the water. So that'll be for houseplants.
Yeah. So the suggestion was from the audience that you take chicken poop, put it in a container, add water, mix it, probably shake it, mix it, and then use that water to do your container planting and house planting. Yeah, but chicken poop is not every day. That's not a once a week application. That's a twice a season application or that nature. That's a good point. Yes.
Do you have a recipe for container running for the soil? I know it has to be smaller than what you have.
Yeah, we could show you. We'll end this, and then we'll answer some more questions from the audience on some tips and tricks. But you could take the soil recipe that we shared and break it down. You don't have to buy as much. And then make you a big bag, and then you can use that for potting. Yes.
Jeremiah 29:5 says, build ye houses and dwell in them, and plant gardens and eat the fruit of them. God will instruct and teach. He who taught Adam and Eve in Eden how to tend the garden will instruct men today. So at this time, this is the end of our presentation. As we get ready to, I'm going to pray to close out, and then we'll lift our tithes and offering, and then have a closing song. And then after that, if there's more questions, we can take more questions. Let's go ahead and bow our heads real quick. Father, which art in heaven, thank you for allowing us to be here today. Lord, we ask, as the information that was disseminated today, Lord, we ask that we're able to retain all that we have been exposed to today, Lord, that we may start out this year, Lord, in doing the gardening, Lord. Help us to be faithful to the garden, Lord. Help us to be diligent with it, Lord. We ask that that it will be fruitful and it will be bountiful, Lord. Help us to gain the blessing, not only from a physical standpoint, Lord, of doing the garden, Lord, but help us to understand spiritually certain aspects of gardening that will help our spiritual lives, Lord. We ask, Lord, as we end this part of the service, Lord, that you will be with us, Lord, and bless us for the rest of the day. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.